Why did they laugh? Why did a crowd of men, seasoned shooters with years of service and medals tucked away in their pasts, feel the need to mock the one person who hadn't yet taken a single shot? The laughter cut through the morning air like knives, sharp, jagged, designed to wound. She felt it, though she didn't show it. Every chuckle, every whispered remark pressed against her skin as if the air itself had turned against her. They didn't see her as competition. They saw her as a spectacle. Anna adjusted the strap across her shoulder and walked steadily across the gravel, each step crunching beneath her boots. The rifle that swung from her shoulder caught the sunlight, bright red, gleaming, almost absurd against the sea of matte black rifles lined neatly on benches. Tactical beasts, engineered for precision, carried by men who had made reputations in war zones and competitions alike. Her weapon did not belong. "That's my kid's Nerf gun," someone said, loud enough for the others to hear. The laughter grew, rolling across the range like a wave. Heads shook. Smirks spread. A few leaned back in their chairs, coffee steaming in their hands as if settling in to watch a show. But she didn't flinch. Not outwardly. Inside, her chest ached, her throat tightened, but she pressed her face into calm, into stillness. Because she'd heard worse. She'd heard the cold silence of doctors explaining why her father wouldn't make it. She'd heard the shallow breaths of a man who had given her everything, dwindling into nothing. She'd heard the loneliness of nights in the garage when the house felt too big, too empty, too quiet. Compared to that, laughter was nothing. Her name was Anna. To most of them, she was nobody. Just a young woman, unproven, dragging what looked like a toy rifle to a stage where legends tested their skill. She didn't correct them, didn't explain, because explanations never changed minds. The red paint wasn't for show. Every mark on the weapon carried memory. The scratches near the bolt, the uneven coat of lacquer on the stock, the way the color caught the light, it was the result of long nights beside her father, a man with grease on his hands and patience in his eyes. He had painted it red for her when she was 12, not because it looked fierce, but because she kept losing her rifle in the grass. He'd laughed when he handed it to her. Cherry Thunder, he'd called it, a joke at first. A name that stuck. Now, Cherry Thunder was all she had left of him. The range master cleared his throat, pulling her back to the present. His voice carried across the valley, 6,000 meters. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd, a challenge so far that even the most seasoned doubted it could be done. The steel plates glimmered in the distance, nearly invisible like coins laid against the horizon. Most had struggled at 5,000. Many had failed. And now 6. Anna felt the weight of the number press into her chest. 6,000 meters. The distance stretched beyond eyesight, beyond reason. It wasn't a shot. It was an act of faith. The first competitor stepped forward. A man built like a fortress, his rifle gleaming with custom fittings, each part designed in sterile labs and tested in the harshest conditions. He carried himself with certainty, with experience, as though the world expected him to hit. He missed. Adjusted, missed again. Another shooter followed, then another. Some came close, but close wasn't enough. The steel plates mocked them, their silence louder than any laughter. Anna set her case down. Kneeling, she opened it slowly as if unwrapping something sacred. She pulled Cherry Thunder free, the red paint flashing against the morning sun. The laughter had stopped now, replaced by whispers, a different kind of attention, heavier than mockery, disbelief. She lay down, pressing her body into the earth. The gravel dug into her elbows, the stock nestled against her cheek. Her hands trembled, not with fear but with memory. She could hear her father's voice. The gun is only as strong as the hands that hold it. The heart behind the trigger, that's what makes the shot. His words lived inside her. They steadied her more than any calculation. She adjusted her scope, checked her wind charts, breathed in, slow, measured. The world narrowed to crosshairs. A shift in the wind caught her attention. She adjusted barely, almost imperceptibly. The kind of change only long hours on the range could teach a person to notice. "Don't fight the wind," her father whispered in memory. "Work with it. Let the earth itself guide you." She exhaled. The barrel rose and fell with her breath, then stilled. She squeezed the trigger. The recoil was soft against her shoulder, familiar. The bullet screamed through 6 kilometers of shifting air. Seconds stretched into eternities. Then clang. The steel plate rang out, a sound rolling back across the valley like a church bell announcing Mass. It carried finality, certainty, truth. No one moved. She worked the bolt, chambered another round, fired again. Clang. And again. Clang. Disbelief cracked into awe. The range, once thick with laughter, now stood in silence, all eyes fixed on her. But she wasn't shooting for them. She wasn't shooting for acknowledgment or applause or the chance to prove the color of her rifle didn't matter. She was shooting for him. For every hour he had spent hunched beside her, correcting her posture, teaching her patience, reminding her that strength didn't come from defiance, but from stillness. She was shooting for the little girl who had once thought Cherry Thunder was just a toy. Her eyes burned with tears, but she wouldn't let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. The final shot rang out, another clang, another impossibility shattered. She rose slowly, her knees stiff from the gravel, slung Cherry Thunder across her back. The silence held until one voice broke it, low, rough, reverent. "That's no toy rifle." The crowd parted as she walked past. Some clapped. Others bowed their heads in quiet respect. The same men who had mocked her now stood aside, unsure of how to meet her eyes. She didn't smile, didn't bask in their approval. She didn't need it. Because she had earned something greater, something untouchable. Acknowledgment. Not for the rifle, not for the shot, for the heart behind it. The lesson lingered long after she stepped off the line, her boots crunching back across the gravel. It's not the look of the weapon, not the reputation of the one who carries it, not the weight of medals or the stories told in smoke-filled rooms. It's the persistence, the belief, the quiet faith that even a painted toy can carry the power to change everything. Sometimes the quietest fighter, the one most underestimated, holds the strength to silence an entire range with a single shot. In Anna, she had just silenced them all. Why didn't she smile? Why didn't victory light her face the way it did with the others, those who bragged and slapped each other on the back after a successful round? Because for Anna, the sound of steel ringing wasn't triumph, it was memory. The crowd clapped now, hesitant at first, then stronger, like they were trying to make up for the mockery they had given her minutes ago. But applause meant little. It was just noise. And she had spent years living in silence, learning that true acknowledgment wasn't something given. It was something earned, often when no one was watching. She walked back slowly, Cherry Thunder heavy on her shoulder. Men who once smirked now kept their eyes down. Others watched her with a strange reverence, as if they had witnessed not a shot, but a revelation. She didn't look at them. Her eyes stayed forward, unfocused, caught somewhere between present and past. Because her father should have been there. The image of his face returned with every step. Not the face near the end, worn and tired, but the one that had leaned over her shoulder years ago, guiding her small hands as she tried to steady the rifle. "Don't rush, Anna. The shot doesn't care about time, it only cares about truth." She had been 12, barely tall enough to balance the stock against her shoulder, the red paint still sticky when he pressed it into her hands. She had laughed, thinking it looked ridiculous. He had laughed too, his voice deep, full, alive. "Better red than lost," he teased, "and besides it suits you." Back then she hadn't understood. Back then, she only wanted to hit tin cans stacked at the far fence, to hear the satisfying clink of impact. He had made her wait, made her line up the shot again and again until she cried from frustration. He didn't comfort her with easy praise. Instead, he sat quietly beside her, patient, unyielding. because he knew that the lesson wasn't about shooting, it was about stillness. Now, years later, standing on the firing line, she realized his patience had been a gift. The applause faded. The murmurs of disbelief turned into low conversations she didn't bother to decipher. She walked past the benches, past the faces, until she reached the edge of the gravel where the grass began again. She knelt, resting Cherry Thunder across her lap, and for the first time allowed herself to breathe. Her fingers traced the grooves on the stock, the uneven ridges in the paint. She remembered the day the brush slipped from her father's hand, leaving a streak across the barrel. He had cursed softly, then smiled, saying, "Even mistakes become part of the story." That streak was still there, a scar of paint, imperfect, uncorrected, just like her. A man approached. She heard his boots before she saw him, heavy steps, deliberate. She didn't lift her head until he spoke. "I served 30 years, he said. His voice was gravel-weathered. "Never saw a shot like that." Anna nodded once, polite but distant. He shifted, uncomfortable. "What's the trick?" She looked up at him finally, her eyes calm, steady. "There isn't one." And she meant it. He waited as if expecting more, but she didn't give it. Because how could she explain that the trick wasn't in the rifle, nor the calculations, nor even the countless hours of practice? It was in the voice she still carried with her. The voice of a man long gone but never silent. That night, alone in her small apartment, she sat at the kitchen table with Cherry Thunder across her knees. The range still lived in her ears, the clang of steel, the hush of disbelief, the crack of gunfire echoing through the valley. But louder than all of that was the memory of her father's cough, the way it rattled the walls, the way it grew deeper, harsher, until it became more than a sound, it became a countdown. She remembered the night he told her the truth, how he sat her down in the garage, the rifle between them, his hands trembling. "Anna," he had said, his voice breaking in ways she had never heard, "there are some fights we can't win." She had refused to listen, had stormed out, furious at his weakness, because to her he had been invincible, a man who could fix anything, build anything, steady her world with just a look. She hadn't wanted to believe that even he could break. When he was gone, Cherry Thunder was all she had left. The red paint, the scar of the streak, the weight in her hands, it was more than a rifle. It was a memory she could touch, a voice she could still hear when silence threatened to consume her. At the range they had seen a toy, she had seen her father. And that was why she hit the target when others failed, because she wasn't aiming for steel, she was aiming for memory. The following week, word spread. Stories grew larger in the telling. Some said she'd hit at 6,000 on her first try. Others swore she'd hit moving targets, or that her rifle carried modifications no one else could replicate. But Anna ignored the noise. She didn't join the forums where debates raged, didn't post the videos others had recorded. She kept to herself, quiet, distant, because she knew the truth, and the truth wasn't a story to be shared. It was grief, it was love, it was silence. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, she took Cherry Thunder out to the field near her childhood home. The grass had grown taller, the fence rusted, but the memories lingered. She set up the old tin cans, just as she had years ago. And for the first time since that day at the range, she allowed herself to cry. Because the shot that silenced a crowd hadn't silenced the ache in her chest. Because no matter how far she could send a bullet, she couldn't close the distance between herself and the man who had taught her to believe in it. The rifle lay across her knees as the tears finally fell. In the quiet she whispered, "I did it, Dad, I really did it." The wind answered, brushing through the tall grass, bending it gently, as if in acknowledgment. And in that moment she felt something deeper than applause, deeper than respect. She felt his presence, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a steadying force inside her. The lesson was clear now. It was never about the rifle, never about the distance, never about silencing laughter. It was about carrying someone forward when they can no longer walk beside you. And Anna knew, as the sun dipped low and the first stars appeared, that Cherry Thunder would always be more than wood and paint and steel. It was her father's voice, her own strength, her reminder that sometimes the hardest battles are not the ones you fight in front of others, but the ones you fight alone in silence. Why did they keep staring at her? Why, days later, did she still feel the weight of their eyes, even in places where no one knew her name? The range had ended in silence, then respect, then whispers. But whispers travel faster than bullets. By the time Anna returned home, the story had already outrun her. Her phone buzzed with messages she hadn't asked for, numbers she didn't recognize. Some were from journalists, others from competitors who wanted to know her rifle's secret, a few from people who called themselves recruiters, hinting at opportunities she didn't understand. She ignored them all, because she hadn't fired that shot for them. She hadn't fired it for recognition or medals or headlines. She had fired it for the only person who couldn't hear it. Yet the world didn't care about that. At the grocery store, she caught two strangers whispering as she walked past. At the local diner, an old man asked if she was the girl with the red rifle. Even at the gas station, the clerk leaned over the counter and asked, almost conspiratorially, was it real, 6,000, or just a story? She gave the same answer every time, silence, because the truth wasn't theirs to own. At night, when the noise of the world faded, she sat with Cherry Thunder across her lap, the rifle resting like a weight both comforting and heavy. She thought of her father. She thought of the moment the steel rang out, the way silence had turned to awe. And though she felt a flicker of pride, it was chased quickly by grief. Because victory didn't bring him back. One evening, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text. A letter folded in a plain envelope, no return address. She frowned as she held it, the paper rough against her fingers. Inside was a single line, handwritten in a sharp, deliberate script. I served with your father. We need to talk. No name, no phone number, just an address scribbled beneath. Anna's chest tightened as she read it again and again. Her father had never spoken much about his service. She knew he had been military, but the details had always been shadows. A few medals in a box, a few stories he told without dates, without names, and always that cough cutting him short, ending sentences before they could reveal too much. She had assumed the silence meant his past was irrelevant, that whatever he had done, he had left it behind. But now someone else remembered him. She sat for hours, the letter on the table, Cherry Thunder leaning against the wall beside her. Her mind spun with questions. Who sent it? Why now? What did they want with her? And the one she couldn't shake. Did her father intend for this moment to come? The next morning she drove. The address led her to the outskirts of a town she barely recognized, to a diner that looked as though it hadn't been remodeled in decades. The sign flickered, the paint chipped. Inside, the smell of coffee and grease filled the air. She slid into a booth, the letter clutched in her hand. Minutes later, a man approached. Broad shoulders, gray hair cropped close, eyes sharp even with age. He moved like someone who had carried weight heavier than his own body for too many years. Anna, he asked. She nodded slowly. He sat across from her, resting his elbows on the table. For a long moment he didn't speak. He just studied her, as if comparing her face to someone he used to know. I knew your father, he said finally. His voice was gravel, low but steady. He was one of the best, quiet, precise, the kind of man you wanted on your side when things fell apart. Anna swallowed hard. She wanted to ask questions, 100 of them, but her throat felt locked. The man continued. He never bragged, never sought the spotlight, but those who worked with him, we knew. He wasn't just skilled, he was rare. Her eyes dropped to the letter in her hand. Why send this now? He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Because word travels. I heard about the shot, 6,000 meters. They said the rifle was painted red. I knew immediately it had to be you, his daughter. Anna's hands tightened into fists beneath the table. That was my shot, not his. The man studied her for a moment, then nodded. You're right, it was yours, but the truth is his lessons live in you, and the world needs people who can do what you did. She frowned. You mean competitions, long-distance shooting? His gaze didn't waver. I mean more than that. There are missions, situations where precision can change everything. We're looking for someone who doesn't just have skill, but the stillness your father carried. You proved you have it. Anna leaned back, her stomach tight. She had come here looking for answers about her father, maybe stories she hadn't heard. She hadn't expected an offer. And yet, as the man spoke, a strange current ran through her, a pull she didn't want to name. Because part of her had wondered, since the day of the shot, what came next. The range had been a moment, but moments fade, and though she carried her father's memory, grief had left her restless. Now here was a door, one she hadn't asked for, one she wasn't sure she wanted to open. I'm not my father, she said quietly. No, the man agreed. You're not, but you carry his fire and maybe more. Silence stretched between them. The clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the hiss of a coffee pot, the hum of conversation from other booths. Ordinary sounds. And yet the weight of the moment pressed against her chest. When she finally stood to leave, the man didn't stop her. He simply slid a small card across the table. A number, a name she didn't recognize. If you're ever ready, he said. Anna took it without looking, tucked it into her pocket. Driving home, the card felt heavier than the rifle sitting in the backseat, heavier than grief. Because for the first time since her father's death, someone was asking her to step forward, to carry his lessons not just for herself, but for others. And though she told herself she wouldn't call, that she would burn the card, that she didn't want their missions, their shadows, their demands. She knew the truth. The truth was already gnawing at her. Because what if her father's lessons weren't just meant to silence a rage? What if they were meant to shape a war she didn't yet see? Why couldn't she let it go? Why couldn't she throw the card away, burn it, pretend the conversation in the diner had never happened? It had been 2 weeks. 2 weeks since the gray-haired man with sharp eyes and a voice like gravel slid that card across the table. 2 weeks since he told her her father had been more than she ever knew. 2 weeks since he whispered about missions, about precision, about a world that lived in the shadows. 2 weeks and still, the card sat on her kitchen counter, untouched but never ignored. Anna moved through her days as if nothing had changed. Work, groceries, quiet nights with cherry thunder propped against the wall like a sentinel. To the outside world, she was the same woman who had stunned a firing range, the same quiet figure who kept her head down. But inside, a war raged. Because she wanted peace. She wanted silence. She wanted to believe that the shot at 6,000 meters had been enough, that her father's memory had found its home in that impossible clang of steel. And yet, every time she closed her eyes, she heard the man's voice. We're looking for someone who doesn't just have skill, but the stillness your father carried. You proved you have it. Every time she touched cherry thunder, her chest tightened with the thought that maybe her father had known this day would come. That maybe the lessons hadn't just been about patience and stillness. Maybe they had been preparation. But preparation for what? One evening, rain hammered against her apartment windows, a relentless rhythm that matched her restless thoughts. She sat at the table, the card between her fingers. She turned it over and over, memorizing the name, the number. The black ink seemed to stare back at her, daring her to decide. She whispered into the empty room, "Dad, what would you want me to do?" Silence answered, "Of course it did." Because this wasn't his choice, it was hers. And that truth terrified her more than anything. The next morning, she carried the card with her, not because she intended to use it, but because leaving it behind felt impossible. It sat heavy in her pocket as she drove, as she worked, as she tried to lose herself in ordinary tasks. At the range, people watched her differently now, some with respect, others with curiosity. A few tried to strike up conversations, but she gave them nothing, because she wasn't there for them. She was there for herself, for the silence of crosshairs, for the fleeting peace that came when the world narrowed to a single point on a distant target. But even there, she couldn't escape. She lined up a shot at 2,000 meters, fired, the steel rang out, but instead of satisfaction, she heard the man's voice. There are missions, situations where precision can change everything. She lined up another, fired, another clang, and this time she imagined not steel plates but people, lives balanced on the thin edge of a bullet. Her breath caught, her finger trembled. She lowered the rifle. Because she didn't want that. Didn't want her skill turned into something that decided whether someone else lived or died. She didn't want blood on Cherry Thunder. Didn't want to corrupt the only piece of her father she had left. But the thought wouldn't leave her. What if refusing meant failing? Not failing herself, but failing the lessons he had given her. The war inside her deepened. That night she dreamed. She was 12 again, standing in the tall grass, Cherry Thunder in her hands. Her father stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. The wind tugged at the grass, bent it in waves. "Steady," he whispered. "Don't fight it, let it guide you." She raised the rifle, aimed at the cans on the fence. But when she pulled the trigger, the cans vanished. In their place stood faceless silhouettes, and behind them people, families, children crouched in fear. Her father's hand tightened on her shoulder. His voice came again, but this time it wasn't calm. It was urgent. "Anna, some fights matter more than others." She woke with a start, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. The card still sat on the table, waiting. Days passed. Her restlessness grew unbearable. She tried ignoring it, tried burying herself in routine, but it gnawed at her, relentless. Until finally one night she picked up the phone. Her hands shook as she dialed the number. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, the same gravel, steady, measured. "I wondered when you'd call," the man said. Anna's throat tightened. For a long moment she couldn't speak. Then finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "What do you want from me?" There was a pause, then, "Not from you, with you, meet me tomorrow, same diner." The line went dead. Anna sat in silence, the phone still pressed to her ear. Her body trembled with something she couldn't name, fear, anger, anticipation. Cherry Thunder leaned against the wall, silent, watching. The next morning she drove to the diner. The man was already there, seated in the same booth. He didn't smile, didn't offer small talk. He simply slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, locations, faces, reports stamped with classifications she didn't understand. Anna stared at them, her pulse quickening. "What is this?" "Proof," he said. "Proof that the world isn't as quiet as you think. Proof that sometimes one shot can save lives." Her stomach twisted. She didn't want to believe him. Didn't want to accept that her skill could belong anywhere but a range, a field, a quiet corner of her grief. But as she looked at the faces in those photographs, the innocent, the frightened, she felt the weight of choice pressing down on her. Because maybe silence wasn't enough. Maybe stillness had a purpose. And maybe, just maybe, her father had known all along that Cherry Thunder wasn't meant to stay in the grass. It was meant to carry her forward. Why did she go back? Why, after nights of restless silence, did she find herself driving not to the range, not to her quiet routines, but to the facility whose address he had given her? Anna told herself it was curiosity, that she wasn't agreeing to anything, that she only wanted answers, about her father, about the man who claimed to have known him, about the whispers of missions and precision. But deep down she knew the truth. It wasn't curiosity, it was restlessness. The kind that no amount of target practice, No amount of clanging steel could quiet. The facility sat on the outskirts of the city, unmarked, hidden in plain sight. A warehouse from the outside, gray and nondescript. Inside, it was something else. Corridors lined with steel, doors that required codes, men and women moving with the kind of discipline that came from years of service. The man from the diner met her at the entrance. No handshake, no pleasantries, just a nod. "You came," he said. Anna tightened her grip on Cherry Thunder's strap. "For answers." He studied her for a moment, then motioned for her to follow. They walked through the corridors, the sound of their footsteps echoing against the walls. The air smelled of metal, oil, and something colder, something harder to name. Finally, they entered a wide room, a range, but unlike any she had seen. Targets moved unpredictably, shifting with mechanical arms. Wind machines hummed quietly in the corners, simulating the turbulence of real environments. "Your father trained here," the man said. Anna's breath caught. She turned, searching his face for truth. "Here." He nodded. This is where he honed what he already carried inside him. Patience, stillness, precision. You have those, too. We want to see how far they go. Her chest tightened. She had expected questions, maybe explanations. She hadn't expected to be thrown into his shadow, standing in the same space he once had, asked to carry the weight of his legacy. She looked at the range, the shifting targets, the mechanical chaos. "I didn't come here to prove myself," she said. The man's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "You already did, 6,000 meters. No one questioned that. This isn't about proving, it's about choosing." He gestured toward the firing line. Anna hesitated. Her fingers trembled as they brushed Cherry Thunder's stock. She could hear her father again, his voice quiet, steady. "The gun is only as strong as the hands that hold it. The heart behind the trigger, that's what makes the shot." Slowly she stepped forward. She set Cherry Thunder on the bench, adjusted her scope. The red paint gleamed under the fluorescent lights, out of place in the sterile gray room. Around her, others watched silently, some skeptical, others curious. The first target shifted left, then right. She followed it through her crosshairs, her breathing steady. She fired. The clang echoed across the room. Another target appeared, moving faster. She adjusted, squeezed, hit again. The sequence grew harder. Wind machines spun up, tugging at the bullet's path. Targets appeared at odd angles, distances she couldn't anticipate. Her body tensed, her mind raced. And then she missed. The silence that followed was heavy. Anna lowered the rifle, her throat tight. She had hit more than most would, she knew that, but the miss burned. Because in that instant she felt the weight of what the man had told her. Sometimes one shot can save lives. She imagined what it would mean if this had been real, if missing meant more than steel left untouched, if it meant someone had died. Her stomach churned. She wanted to walk away, to tell them she wasn't built for this world. But then she heard it again, her father's voice, not as memory, but as if it lived inside her. "Don't fight the wind, work with it. Let the earth itself guide you." She set her jaw, loaded another round. The next target appeared. She adjusted slower this time, breathed, fired. Clang! She stayed at the line for what felt like hours. Hit. Hit again. Each shot carving deeper into her chest, forcing her to confront the truth she had been avoiding. That this wasn't just about her anymore. When it was over, she slumped back, sweat dampening her shirt, her hands raw against the rifle. The man approached, his face unreadable. "You did well." "I missed," she said quietly. He nodded. "You will, everyone does, but what matters isn't the miss, it's what you do after." She stared at Cherry Thunder, at the streak of paint her father had left years ago. For the first time, she wondered if carrying it into this world was betrayal, if turning it into a weapon of missions, of shadows, was dishonoring what it had meant to her. But another voice inside whispered differently. Maybe this was honoring him. Maybe carrying Cherry Thunder into places where precision meant survival was the truest way to keep his lessons alive. That night, lying in her small apartment, Anna couldn't sleep. The images replayed in her head, the targets shifting, the clangs, the silence of the miss, the man's words. What matters isn't the miss, it's what you do after. She thought of her father's cough, of his hand on her shoulder, of the day he told her there were some fights they couldn't win. Maybe this was hers to win. But at what cost? She turned toward Cherry Thunder, propped against the wall. The red paint glowed faintly in the moonlight, the scar of the streak catching her eye. She whispered into the dark, "Dad, am I strong enough for this?" No answer came, only silence. But silence was what she had been trained to live in. And deep down she knew, silence was enough. Why did the air feel heavier that morning? Why, when Anna stepped into the same gray facility, did the silence seem sharper, like the pause before a storm? She had trained here for weeks now. Hours spent at the range, firing until her shoulder ached, until her breathing fell into rhythm with the rise and fall of the crosshairs. She had pushed past doubt, past misses, past the gnawing fear that Cherry Thunder didn't belong in this sterile place. But today was different. The man, her father's old comrade, met her at the door. His eyes, sharp as ever, carried something new, a weight. "Anna," he said quietly, "it's time." She frowned. For what? He didn't answer, just led her down the corridor, past rooms she had never entered, past doors locked with codes she had never been given. Finally, he stopped at one marked only with a number. Inside was not a range. It was a room dressed as a city street. Windows, alleyways, cars parked at angles, mannequins scattered like people frozen mid-stride. Some carried weapons, some didn't. Speakers hummed faintly, ready to unleash the chaos of voices, sirens, gunfire. Anna froze at the threshold. "What is this?" she whispered. "A test," he said simply. "Not of your aim, of your judgment." Her pulse quickened. She looked at Cherry Thunder in her hands, the red paint bright against the artificial street. "I didn't come here for this," she said. He met her eyes, steady, unflinching. "Then why did you come?" She had no answer, not one she could speak. Because deep down she knew. She hadn't come for targets. She hadn't come for applause. She had come because something inside her couldn't stay silent. And maybe he knew that too. The lights dimmed. A voice crackled overhead. "Simulation begins in 5-4. Anna's chest tightened. 3-2-1. Chaos erupted. Sirens wailed. Shouts filled the air. Figures darted between alleys, some holding rifles, others clutching children. Her scope lit with possibilities, targets, threats, innocence. Her finger hovered near the trigger. She froze. Her father's voice whispered in memory. "The shot doesn't care about time. It only cares about truth." But what was truth here? A figure emerged from a doorway, weapon raised. Instinct screamed. She adjusted, fired. The mannequin dropped. Clang! Her heart pounded. Another figure rushed forward, no weapon, hands raised. She shifted, her crosshairs brushing his chest. Her finger twitched, then stopped. She exhaled, lowered her aim. The voice overhead cut in sharp. "Failure." Her stomach dropped. The man beside her didn't flinch. "Why didn't you take the shot?" Anna's throat tightened. "Because he wasn't a threat." "And how do you know?" She looked at him, anger flashing. "Because I chose to believe he was." He studied her, silent, then finally, "Good." She blinked. "Good." He nodded once. "We don't need killers, we need judgment. A rifle in the wrong hands is just steel and fire, but in the right hands," he paused, his gaze piercing, "it's restraint." Anna's breath shook. She hadn't expected praise, hadn't expected the miss, the refusal to matter more than the hit. But maybe this was the lesson her father had tried to teach. That sometimes the hardest shot wasn't the one you took, it was the one you didn't. The simulation reset. Again, chaos filled the room. Figures moved, weapons flashed. Anna adjusted, fired, missed, chose. Each moment tore at her, each decision heavier than the last. When it was over, she was trembling. Sweat dripped down her temples. Her throat was dry. The man placed a hand on her shoulder. This is what it means to carry precision into the real world. Not glory, not headlines, responsibility. She looked down at Cherry Thunder, her father's scarred paint glowing under the harsh lights. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she could carry that weight. That night she lay awake, the simulation replaying in her mind. The figure without a weapon, the pause before the trigger, the voice declaring failure, then the quiet word, good. She thought of her father again, of the nights in the garage, of the way he taught her to slow down, to breathe, to let the wind guide her. Maybe he had been preparing her for this, not for hitting targets, but for knowing which ones weren't. And yet the fear remained. Because what if one day she chose wrong? What if one day silence wasn't enough? She turned toward Cherry Thunder, resting against the wall, still bright, still absurdly red in a world that demanded camouflage. She whispered into the dark, "Dad, how do I know when to pull the trigger?" No answer came. But maybe there never would be. Maybe that was the point. Because some truths couldn't be given, they had to be carried. And Anna carried them now, whether she was ready or not. Why did the air feel different here? Why did the night press against her skin like a living thing, heavy, waiting? Anna lay prone on the rooftop, Cherry Thunder nestled into her shoulder. The red paint seemed out of place against the dark canvas of the city below, but she didn't care anymore. She wasn't here to blend in. She was here to see clearly. Through her scope, the street below stretched in fragments, windows glowing dimly, alleys thick with shadows, figures moving in the distance. Some were harmless, some weren't. Her breath slowed. Her heart fought to quicken, but she forced it back down. This wasn't a simulation. This was real. Beside her, a man's voice whispered through the earpiece. Calm, clipped. Target expected within 2 minutes. Watch the second-floor balcony left side. Anna adjusted her scope, found the balcony, empty. Her crosshairs lingered over the door behind it. Her stomach knotted. It should have been simple. Wait, confirm, act. But nothing about it felt simple. Because for the first time, the clang of steel wouldn't follow her shot. For the first time, silence wouldn't mean failure. It would mean death. She tightened her grip on the stock. Her father's words came back like a tide. The gun is only as strong as the hands that hold it. The heart behind the trigger, that's what makes the shot. Her heart hammered. What kind of heart did she have? Movement. The door opened. A man stepped onto the balcony, tall, broad, moving with confidence. Through her scope, she saw the outline of a rifle slung across his chest. The target. Her breath stilled. The voice in her earpiece cut through. Clear shot, take it. Her finger hovered, she exhaled. But then behind him, a second figure emerged, smaller, unarmed, a child. Anna's chest clenched. The crosshairs blurred as her eyes flicked between them. The voice in her ear grew sharper. Anna, focus, the target. Her finger trembled. Her father's whisper rose again. Don't fight the wind, work with it. Let the earth itself guide you. But this wasn't wind, this was a life. She lowered the scope slightly, just enough to see the child's face. Eyes wide, confused, unaware of the weapon at her shoulder. Anna, the voice snapped. Do you copy? Take the shot. Her throat locked. This wasn't a mannequin. This wasn't a test. If she missed, if she chose wrong. Her finger froze. The target shifted, moving back inside, pulling the child with him. The door shut. Silence. The voice in her ear erupted. Opportunity lost. What the hell happened? Anna didn't answer. Her breath came sharp, ragged. She pulled her head away from the scope, pressing her face into the cold rooftop. She had failed, or had she? She didn't know anymore. The exfil was quiet. The others said nothing as they packed up, their silence heavier than any words. Anna carried Cherry Thunder back across the rooftops, each step a weight, each shadow pressing in. Back at the facility, the man was waiting, her father's comrade, the one who had brought her here. He studied her, unreadable. Finally, he asked, "Why didn't you take the shot?" Her voice cracked, "Because there was a child. And I couldn't risk it." The silence stretched, his eyes held hers, then finally he nodded. "You made the right call." Her breath shook, "But I failed the mission." "You failed the mission," he agreed, "but you didn't fail yourself or your father." Tears burned her eyes, but she held them back. "Then what was the point, if I can't do what you need me to?" He cut her off, his voice firm. "We don't need a rifle that fires on command. We need a person who knows when not to fire. That's rarer than any shot you'll ever take." His words hit her harder than any recoil. Because in that moment she realized, maybe silence was the shot. Maybe restraint was as powerful as impact. Later, alone in her apartment, she sat with Cherry Thunder across her knees. The red paint caught the lamplight, the scar of the streak gleaming faintly. She whispered into the quiet, "Dad, I couldn't do it." But as the words left her lips, another thought followed, softer, unspoken. Maybe she had done it. Because she hadn't become a weapon, not yet. And maybe that was the point. Sleep didn't come easy that night. But when it did, she dreamed not of misses or failures, not of clangs or applause, but of her father's hand on her shoulder, steady, quiet, unshaken. And for the first time since stepping into this shadowed world, she felt something close to peace. Not because she had fired, but because she hadn't. Why had it all come to this? Why had a single shot at a range, a red rifle that looked like a toy, a clang heard across 6 kilometers, unraveled her life into something she hadn't asked for, hadn't imagined? Anna sat alone on her balcony, Cherry Thunder resting across her knees. The night stretched around her, endless, the city below glowing in fractured pieces of light. The air was cool, steady, the kind of night her father would have loved, quiet, unhurried, waiting. It had been months since that first impossible shot. Months since she had walked into the facility, since she had faced simulations that tested not her aim but her restraint, since she had gone on her first mission and refused to fire. And still the questions haunted her. Had she failed? Had she betrayed her father's lessons? Or had she honored them in the only way she knew how? The world outside didn't answer. It never did. She closed her eyes and let her fingers trace the stock of the rifle, the ridges, the scratches, the streak of paint her father had left behind, imperfect, uncorrected, a mistake that had become part of the story. Just like her. She thought of the men at the range, their laughter slicing through the morning. She thought of the clang of steel, the way silence had turned into awe. She thought of the man at the diner sliding a letter across the table. She thought of simulations, mannequins, missions, choices. And she thought always of her father. "Some fights matter more than others," he had said in her dream. But what did he mean? Her phone buzzed beside her, a message from the facility, another mission, another request, another chance to step into the shadows. She stared at it for a long time. Then she set the phone aside. Because tonight, she didn't need missions. She didn't need applause. She didn't need the weight of decisions that bent her chest until she couldn't breathe. Tonight she needed silence. She lifted Cherry Thunder, set it gently against the wall beside her chair. She leaned back, her hands finally empty. The city moved on without her. Cars passed. Sirens wailed in the distance. Lives unfolded in thousands of windows she couldn't see. And for the first time, she realized that maybe carrying her father's memory wasn't about shots taken or missed, about applause or missions or silence. Maybe it was about living. Because he hadn't raised her to be a weapon. He hadn't painted the rifle red so she could disappear into shadows. He had done it so she could see clearly, so she would never lose it in the grass, so she could hold on to something when the world grew too heavy. She smiled faintly, a rare, fragile thing. The lesson wasn't the shot. It wasn't the clang. It wasn't even the silence that followed. It was persistence, patience, the belief that even in a world of laughter, of doubt, of impossible distances, the heart behind the trigger mattered more than anything else. Anna rose, the chair scraping softly against the concrete. She picked up Cherry Thunder, slung it across her shoulder. She whispered into the night, words carried on the wind. "Dad, I'm still here." And in the quiet she felt it again, not an answer, not a voice, but a presence. Not gone, not forgot, carried forward. She turned, stepped back inside. The phone still sat on the table, its screen glowing faintly. She picked it up, stared at the message one last time. Then she powered it off. Because sometimes dignity doesn't need to speak. Sometimes it doesn't need to fire. Sometimes dignity is choosing silence when the world demands noise. Anna closed her eyes, Cherry Thunder heavy on her shoulder, her father's lesson steady in her chest. And in that moment she knew. She didn't need to prove anything ever again. Because the quietest fighter, the most underestimated underdog, had already silenced them all. Not with a bullet, but with the strength to carry on.